headed the Iraqi side, while the Jordanian side was headed by His Majesty King Hussein bin Talal. During the talks, King Hussein congratulated His Excellency President Saddam Hussein on the victory, which will be reflected on the present and the future of the Arab nation. His Excellency President Saddam Hussein held the national stand of Jordan and its support for Iraq. Present at the talks from the Iraqi side were Mr. Taha Yassin Ramadan, Revolution's Command Council member and First Deputy Prime Minister, General Adnan Khairallah, Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Iraqi Armed Forces and Minister of Defense, Mr. Tariq Aziz, Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, Mr. Latif Sayyid Jassim, Minister of Culture and Information and Head of the Honorary Mission, Mr. Ahmed Hussein, Head of the Presidency Office, Mr. Hussein Kamel, Minister of Industry and Military Manufacturing, the President's Secretary, and the Iraqi Ambassador in Amman. While representing the Jordanian side were His Highness Prince Abdullah bin Hussein, His Highness Prince Faisal bin Hussein, His Highness Prince Talal bin Muhammad, His Highness Prince Ghazi bin Muhammad, Mr. Zaid al-Rifa'i, the Prime Minister, Mr. Marwan al-Qasim, Head of the Royal Court, Mr. Adnan Abu Auda, Minister of Court, Field Marshal Zaid bin Shakir, Commander-in-Chief of the Jordanian Armed Forces, Major General Ihsan Sherdam, Air Force Commander, Major General Fawzi Abeidad, the Assistant Chief of Staff for Planning and Organization, and the Jordanian Chargé d'Affaires in Baghdad. The official talks between Iraq and Jordan were resumed today. His Excellency President Saddam Hussein headed the Iraqi side, while the Jordanian side was headed by His Majesty King Hussein bin Talal. Present at the talks from the Iraqi side were Mr. Taha Yassin Ramadan, Revolution's Command Council member and First Deputy Prime Minister, General Adnan Khairallah, Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Iraqi Armed Forces and Minister of Defense, Mr. Tariq Aziz, Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, Mr. Latif Sayyid Jassim, Minister of Culture and Information and Head of the Honorary Mission, Mr. Ahmed Hussein, Head of the Presidency Office, Mr. Hussein Kamel, Minister of Industry and Military Manufacturing, and the President's Secretary. While present at the talks from the Jordanian side were Mr. Zaid al-Rifa'i, the Prime Minister, Mr. Marwan al-Qasim, Head of the Royal Court, Mr. Adnan Abu Auda, Minister of Court, Field Marshal Zaid bin Shakir, Commander-in-Chief of the Jordanian Armed Forces, Major General Ihsan Sherdam, the Air Force Commander, and Major General Fawzi Abeidad, the Assistant Chief of Staff for Planning and Organization. His Excellency President Saddam Hussein held a lunch banquet in honor of His Majesty King Hussein bin Talal, attended by both sides' members. President. In appreciation to His Majesty King Hussein's stance and the Jordanian people in supporting Iraq during its battles against the Iranian aggression and defending the eastern flank of the Arab nation, the Arab nation's dignity and its future, His Excellency President Saddam Hussein of the Republic of Iraq and Commander-in-Chief of the Iraqi Armed Forces presented the following military equipment which were captured by the Iraqi Armed Forces during the liberating battles of Ramadan Mubarak, توكلنا على الله الأولى الثانية الثالثة والرابعة and Muhammad Rasulullah to Jordanian Armed Forces. A list of the army hardware presented to Jordan: 19 tanks type Chieftain, 60 tanks type M47, 19 tanks type Scorpion, 35 M11-3 armored personnel carrier. His Majesty King Hussein expressed his deep appreciation for this brotherly gesture. The Hussein, Mr. Taha Yassin Ramadan, Revolutions Command Council Member and First Deputy Prime Minister, General Adnan Khairallah, Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Iraqi Armed Forces and Minister of Defense, Mr. Tariq Aziz, Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, Revolutions Command Council Members, Mr. Latif Nassayib Jassim, Minister of Culture and Information, and Head of the Honorary Mission, Mr. Ahmed Hussein, Head of the Presidency Office, the Ministers, the President Secretary, the Charge d'Affaires and staff of the Jordanian Embassy. Accompanying His Majesty King Hussein bin Talal during his visit were His Highness Prince Abdullah bin Hussein, His Highness Prince Faisal bin Hussein, His Highness Prince Talal bin Mohammed, His Highness Prince Ghazi bin Mohammed, Mr. Zaid Rifai, the Jordanian Prime Minister, Mr. Marwan al-Qasim, Head of the Royal Court, Mr. Adnan Abu Auda, Minister of Court, Field Marshal Zaid bin Shakir, Commander-in-Chief of the Jordanian Armed Forces, Major General Ahsan Shardam, the Air Force Commander, and Major General Fawzi Ubaidad, the Assistant Chief of Staff.